Hello. So this presentation is going to be a really fast overview of Peter Singer's pretty famous essay on the ethics of donation, famine, affluence, and morality. Just about any introductory philosophy class that covers ethics is very likely to present Singer's ideas on the ethics of donating. And most people would say that donating to charity, and we're talking about charities that are sort of helping people to survive. There's all sorts of just giant range of charities. The ones he's specifically thinking of are those that are helping people that are in serious food crisis or somehow or another just don't have enough resources to be able to survive. So that said, people might still say that donating to such charities is morally good, but maybe not morally required. The term that we use for that is being morally supererogatory. So that's a fancy word just meaning morally good to do, but not morally required. It's sort of going above and beyond. That's very frequently people's views on donating to charity. If you're extremely wealthy and you're still not donating to charity, maybe people will be a little bit more willing to say that you're somehow seriously failing morally, ethically. But for most people, sort of average income, yeah, it's good to do it, but not morally required that you do it. You're not somehow a bad person if you don't donate to charity. So Singer's going to challenge that conclusion. And so, just as a preview, right, is where we're aiming at with all of this. Singer does think that we should donate more money or whatever resources. He kind of makes the argument in terms of money, but it doesn't have to be just in terms of money. But we should be donating more money to desperately poor people around the world rather than spending that money on sort of everyday luxuries for ourselves, or even big luxuries, any kind of luxuries for ourselves. When there's people dying, that's where the money should be going. And this essay, actually, it's from the early 70s. And this is when it was becoming more and more popular in the applied ethics literature to use arguments by analogy. And so an argument by analogy is usually used when we've got some issue that people already have very firmly set beliefs about, so they're very unlikely to be open to having their beliefs changed sort of in a direct way. Or it could be something that people have a very hard time thinking about directly. It might be very complicated, or it might be emotionally fraught somehow. It just makes it very difficult for people to think through the moral issues in a clear and straightforward way. And so what an author will do in such a case is come up with some hypothetical scenario. The more realistic, the better, but it doesn't always have to be a completely realistic scenario. But what's important is that it's understandable, it's relatively simple, but it has the same moral features as the issue that we're actually interested in, the complicated one, or the emotionally fraught one, or the one that people already have very firmly set beliefs about. And so we construct this hypothetical scenario that has the same moral features. We come to some relatively easy conclusion, moral conclusion about the hypothetical scenario. And then we sort of export that moral reasoning to the more difficult situation, the more difficult issue. And hopefully it'll make it easier for us to come to the conclusion that the author desires once we've gone through that process. So, of course, the issue here is donating to charities. And as I said, very often people will believe that this is a supererogatory act. Good to do, but not bad if you fail to do it. So this is where Peter Singer comes up with his analogy then. And it's one of the most famous analogies in the applied ethics literature. Yeah, here we go. So suppose that you are walking past a shallow pond and nobody else is around, and except that you notice that a small child is drowning in this pond. And it's not one you have to swim into, right? Like you can wade out into the pond, you're tall enough, you're an adult, so you're not in danger of drowning. But this is a small child, and so their feet can't touch the bottom, so they're going to drown. It seems pretty clear. But you don't know what the bottom of this pond is like. In fact, maybe you do know what it's like, and it's nasty and mucky, and maybe there's some just some nasty filth, some pollution or something at the bottom of this pond. And so if you were to wade out into this pond, you are pretty much certain to ruin your shoes. And let's say they're pretty nice shoes. They're maybe even new, nice shoes. So what should you do? Should you just walk on by and say, well, I don't want to ruin my shoes. Yeah, it'd be nice to save this child, but I don't want to risk my shoes in order to save this child, so I'll just let them drown. Or do you say that you should, despite the fact that you know you're going to ruin your shoes, you should wade in and save this child's life? That saving the child seems vastly more important than saving your shoes in this situation. Most people will say, yes, it seems clear that we should save the child's life, even at the risk to our own brand new pair of relatively expensive shoes. And so that's the reasoning, the conclusion that Singer's expecting us to get to. And so then he thinks like, so why is it that people are so ready to accept that we should save the child's life? There's got to be some kind of relatively standard reasoning that people are using, some moral principle that people are using to arrive at this pretty obvious conclusion that the child's life should be saved. And this is how Singer articulates that moral principle. He says, if you have the ability to stop something very bad from happening without sacrificing something of comparable moral worth, then you're obligated to do so. So saving the child's life, the child drowning would be very, very bad, and you can easily prevent that bad thing from happening, but it will cost you a little something. It will cost you, your new shoes, the niceness of your shoes. You might even have to buy a new pair of shoes. But those shoes are not of comparable moral worth to this child's life. So yes, you'll be sacrificing something, but it won't be of comparable moral worth, so you're obligated to save the child's life. That's the moral principle that he thinks we're using. So now we take that reasoning from the analogy, the analogous hypothetical scenario of the child drowning in the shallow pond, and we shift that over to what's going on with donating to charities. And maybe you can see how this reasoning plays out, but here's sort of the spelled out argument. So premise one is just saying what it seems like should be pretty straightforwardly obvious. In fact, Singer even says, if you disagree with premise one, don't bother reading any further because none of the rest is going to be remotely convincing to you. But premise one does say that death from starvation and preventable disease is very bad. Pretty straightforward. The second premise is just that moral principle that we got from thinking about the shallow pond scenario. If you have the ability to stop something very bad from happening without sacrificing something of comparable moral worth, then you're obligated to do so. Then the third premise is then doing a lot of new work that we haven't already seen or that we wouldn't already be inclined to agree with. So by donating money to or volunteering for, like I said before, Singer makes the argument in terms of just cash donations, but that's not the only way to help out. So by donating money or somehow volunteering for or providing resources for a charity that provides relief in a crisis area, you can prevent at least some death and starvation from preventable disease without sacrificing something of comparable moral worth. You'll be donating some of your own money that you could buy another pair of shoes for yourself. You could go to the movies when going to the movies was the thing that we did, before the pandemic, hopefully again after the pandemic, or just whatever other kinds of things that you spend money on that aren't direct necessities for you to survive. It's not rent, it's not basic food, maybe it's fancy food or an extra dessert or something like that, or more clothes that you don't actually need, other electronics you don't actually need. And when I say need, I mean need to actually survive and live your life. So all of this other money that we're spending on all of these things that we don't need is money that could be used to actually save somebody's life. And if you failed to do that, according to this argument from Singer, then that's basically morally the same as walking on by the kid drowning in the shallow pond and saying, well, if I ruin my shoes, I'd have to pay another $100 whatever for new shoes, so I'm just going to let the child die. So that's the same thing that's going on here, right? I'm spending whatever, a few $100s a month or every few months on relative luxuries for myself. and I could be spending that money donating it to charities, and those charities, the good ones, the established good ones, have a good record of actually saving people's lives with the money that you give them. And so if I fail to do that, then it's like I'm letting the child drown. So this is his overall argument in favor of donating to charities, and that it's obligatory that we donate to charities. And probably you already understand sort of the children that he's talking about. He does describe a famine that was happening at the time when he wrote this essay in the early 70s, but we have no shortage of causes that are similar nowadays. Just these are heartbreaking pictures of children that clearly through no fault of their own happen to be living in an area where there's a serious crisis going on, whether it's famine or it's war or it's over pollution of their living area, whatever it might be. They're living in really desperate circumstances and they could die if they don't get help. And of course, he makes the argument in terms of children because that does sort of engage our emotions perhaps a little more strongly so that we're a little bit more likely to agree with his conclusion. But it doesn't have to be children. It's really, there's lots of people, of course, that find themselves in these sorts of crisis situations. On the left here, this is a refugee camp where people are fleeing a war-torn area and they have no resources. It's like, how are they supposed to survive? They were being bombed and killed back in where they normally were living. Now they're here and there's no food, there's no water, there's no medical assistance of any kind. Where's this help supposed to be coming from? They're all going to die if they don't get it, is the idea. And then on the right, this is a woman, I'm pretty sure this is from a tornado that happened in Oklahoma and destroyed a town, a small town, and same situation, right? It's like their whole infrastructure is gone now. They're going to die if they don't get help. And so the Red Cross and UNICEF and Oxfam and some of these big charities have a really well-established track record for actually helping people that are in this situation if they get enough money. So that's what Singer's talking about, and this is usually there's a robust discussion that can happen in a class when talking about ways in which maybe the shallow pond is disanalogous with the donating to charities situation. So there's a lot of questions, in fact, many of which are addressed in Singer's actual essay, but my intent here was just to explicate the central argument here. So I think I'm going to stop there. Thanks.